Right then, this is the peanut shell of the NeTx profile, ENTP. And right off the bat, you can see why, well, I'm going to explain why I call this type the NeTx. Need NE, and it depends on which mode type resembler is in as to which function is at the forefront. Now, how can I prove or persuade you of the importance of TE in the NTP? If you think of, if you look in the Russo and Hudson levels of development, level 3 for Enneagram 7 talks about the type being productive. Think about this type when this type is the inventor. So when you're inventing, you have to apply ideas, you have to use business logic. So that's TE. Dario Nardi believes that he calls this function the sixth function. He believes that this is the function that needs to be developed. And it makes sense that when you see people, especially say the Keirsey profiles, or those profiles that seem a little bit on the high side, the well-developed, sort of like the ideal version of the type, it seems to be this function strong here. So I can give you an example. If you think of ESFJ that's not codependent and that can stand up for themselves with the strong creative extroverted sensor, sort of like an Enneagram type 2 that's gone to the high side of Enneagram 8. So if you click the link below, Joe, female ENTP resembler, will go through this profile with me. And as you can see, there's lots of detail there. So as you can see, there's 4 blocks going on here. So the social mission, this matches up quite well with the Keirsey idea of the role variant. I would suggest that the Keirsey idea of the role variant is slightly better than the social mission in Socionics, because it's a little bit too deterministic. So for example, this is strong and this is strong, therefore they do this. Whereas with the Keirsey role variant, they would say that the role variant is the social role and that the type has a predisposition to play that role. And obviously they can play other roles, especially if you think of women who have been subjected to gender role socialization, where they may not be able to enact the role that they are predisposed to. So, but that said, it matches up quite well if you think of Keirsey as the inventor, the modeler, turning the design into a prototype and perfecting the prototype. And that is also why this is a process type in Socionics. So we have these two working together. So again, ideas and applying those ideas. It fits what an inventor does. We don't think of the other kind, of a different kind of, say, developed ENTP. Those that maybe go more into philosophy, academia, mathematics. There might be more of the TI coming into place. Say a more theoretical ENTP. And of course, in various roles, and especially in the role of inventor, where the TE is really strong and developed, they're going to go for the TI, the subjective thinking. So you can think of TI either as structural logic or subjective thinker. So it's subjective, it's going to be more original, and that feeds in with the NE. So another thing about this block, these functions on the top suppress the lower functions. and which sort of matches up what you will see in real life, where with an extrovert, their introverted functions are semi-repressed in that they're not going to be used that much when the type is extroverted. When the type is on their territory, these functions here will come into play a little bit more. Now, again, the way you think, oh yes, maximum energy. So, and almost you can say that these two functions for all types can be overindulged at the expense of other functions. So, maximum energy, this is just enough energy for this. This is a tool to achieve this. And again, if you think of the inventor, application, productivity, business logic. I'll go to the self-affirmation. So Victor uses the metaphor of rider horse, where the any in this case would be the rider, the one in control, and the TI would be the horse. Although it's a little bit ironic in that in this example, the rider is a little bit ADHD, and maybe the horse is a bit more logical. But again, with the strong TE, it's more of a developed ENTP. If they're more of that kind, or the more theoretical kind of ENTP, NETI. I'll get over to these other blocks in a moment. Also, overall, EP temperament, flexible, active. So I won't call it temperament. Sort of Keirsey has earned the right to use that word. I will translate it as mindset. So whether someone is extroverted, irrational type, or extroverted, perceiving type. So flexible and active, a little bit artisanish. So it's almost as if this type is like an abstract ESTP that's less likely to pull down somebody's underpants there. Oh, the cliches I can go into. This sort of shift, the self-affirmation shift, if you think about me, if you think about INTP, when they're on the territory, you see me in Hangouts, or if you probably see if your convention of INTP is, let's say, a mathematics convention, and they're meeting people of their own kind, they're going to get a little bit. David Keirsey Jr. calls it, again, flaky. And he said that the masterminds, the INTJs, looked at him a little bit funny when he sort of went off on one making connections. You know, talked about joining all fields of knowledge together. So this is interesting depending on how you conceive of this type, PISI. If you're going with, again, the Keirsey version, the crafter, you can see, again, if you think of role enactment, inventor, crafter, you got to build the thing. You have to apply it. And you could also say in that situation, a little bit of extroverted sensing has to come in, that this type can switch to minimum energy to achieve the task. However, when the task is something that they are enthusiastic for, then there's more energy for this. So the SE would be them being more present, more focused. And you could say that ENTP needs to be more focused when they're interacting with people, they have to be focused on the person. Or when they're doing something mechanical. I mean, this is stereotypes, but Jo does build robots. So she's an extrovert in her thinker. So if you think them shifting to TISI, if you think of the typical role enactment of ISTP. Now, this also can be viewed as LSI, which is a type which is the equivalent would be in the West a sort of ISTJ-ish type, but with a bit rough around the edges with the extroverted, with the power sensor. So think of Vladimir Putin. You know, he goes into a cage, he's stroking a dangerous cat. It's probably well fed beforehand, mind you. But that is definite counterphobic tendencies from Putin. Look at the fear in his eyes. You contrast him with somebody like Modi, whose eyes are like, bring it on. That kind of 8, ESTP, ESFP, they're stimulated by confrontation. Although that is going to be up to a point because they can get PTSD too. You know, they're not really going to be saying bring it on if they see their friends get blown up by an IED. A bit here. So optimum energy. Yes, this, and again with this row, it has a smaller scope of use. Because they sort of more come into play when they're introverted. Talk more about that later. The self-affirmation block. If you think about when the ENTP is reader, you would think that the TI is coming more into play. Although there's going to be moments, and it certainly happens to me, as an INTP resemble where, yes, they're going to read something, but it's going to be always the starting point for making the connections or their own interpretation of subjective logic. With the SI, when they're on their territory, they're going to be, again, the scope of use of it, but it's going to be powerful. I think this is SI minus, Ian. This is a charges thing. There's a hangout on it. It's VG number 7. Victor Gulenko hangout number 7. This SI here is, I'll just lean back a bit more towards the microphone. So this is comfort sensor in Socionics. And I suppose when they're on their territory, they can sort of know how to take care of themselves in limited situations to avoid getting ill. It's also something that they appreciate from their jewel, which is ISFJ, SEI, and yes, Socionics SEI, especially the Gulenko one, correlates well to the Keirsey ISFJ protector. So the ISFJ likes to take care of people. And in the Keirsey profile, it's like they almost give more attention towards the ill person than the well person. So again, it's suggestive, it's dual-seeking function. That thing can vary a little bit depending upon the type of the parent, so it can sort of affect how much they need that, or say how independent they are. So if you think of, say, in Joe's case, she's got a 3 fix in her tri-type, so probably a little bit more independent, a little bit more EP. Right, so now on the EP thing, we're going to get to the social adaptation block. They can switch between NE and SE, but these two things cannot happen at the same time, especially if we use Dario Nardi's definition of trans-contextual thinking. So it's making the connection between the present context and a different context. And if you're doing that, you cannot be immersed in the present context, where when someone is immersed, stimulated and immersed in the present context, all of the information is coming in and they can improvise. This also can be seen as, this type is also frequently Enneagram type 7, but if you cramp their freedom, they can resist quite well with the extroverted sensing. So it's being present in the moment, and it's the ability to resist and stand up for themselves. You'll notice that this type is, it comes across as more assertive than INTP, LII, logical intuitive introvert. FE. The idea here is that, and again, the externalities are directed towards society and going to be with the, and again, social roles. societal role, social adaptation. Theory here is that when these functions do not suit the task at hand, it goes to other extroverted functions. So when the ENTP rather, the NeTx, has to be present, say when interacting with people, it's going to be SEFE and be a little bit like, so they shift to, so superego shift to SEFX, ESFP. In this case, they're sort of launcher FEs. This is tertiary FE in JBTI, Young-Briggs type indicator, which is what it should be called. Certainly, if I were Carl Jung, I would have sued them for using my theory. I would have gone for, I want paying 50%. The idea here with the launcher function is that it's the hidden agenda, it's the mobilizing function. People have, this is the eyes are bigger than your belly function. So if the FE is the meal, and they really like the idea of FE, but when it comes down to it, they've not got the energy for it. So it's more walk and less talk. So they like the idea of socializing, but it's like they're not able to like stay present with the emotions. It's tiring for them. They're only really going to do it. They're only really going to do the FE thing if there's ideas at play. And they're not really going to do it if it's like a flat conversation with no ideas. So now in Victor's model, this is Fi minus, and they're stimulated by negative emotions. So I wonder when an ENTP would encounter negative emotions. Perhaps when they're trolling someone because they're into the intellectual exercise of, because they see, and this goes to the Fi thing, because they have very flexible minds and they can look at an issue from many different angles. So especially when they get into philosophy, they can learn that, say in ethics, that there's no real, it's all, they see it as moral relativism, and certainly Mark Linsenmeyer, and sometimes talks in the American philosopher's voice, on the PEL podcast, so Partially Examined Life, he is more of a moral relativist and more situational ethics. So when they do that though, and they espouse, play devil's advocate, or espouse a position, they might encounter some negative emotions they get happy with that. So there is a tendency to trolling. The more well-developed ENTPs are going to sort of learn that they get there. And you can also probably got a beneficiary shift here to ENFJ. So when they get that positive feedback, then they are going to be more developed and do the FE thing, not be the troll. Get that connection. Well, the positive feedback and emotions from people, from a jolly atmosphere. Jack Aaron once talked about, and this is an example of ENTP, is that he would be perfectly happy at a dinner party with a serial killer to the left and a priest to the right, because he's more interested in the intellectually stimulating conversation rather than being in a conversation of people with of good character. Because to them, what is good character? As long as there isn't sort of external harm, especially to them, they sort of just care about an interesting conversation. So abstract and flexible. This brings us to the inflation avoidance block. And look at the type that's in here, FINI, that's a social mission block of the INFP. So INFP is not going to be happy with the morally relativistic, trollish ENTP. And this is their supervisor, INFP. So FI. ENTPs, if you put an ENTP in the same clothes as an ENFP, they have a tendency to appear more awkward than the ENFP. And I think in that case, it's because the ENFP's personality matches their clothing, their general appearance. And so that it doesn't look like the clothes are wearing the ENFP. Now with the ENTP, they can look a bit weird with them, and they frequently wear a bow tie because they want to look interesting. So their style with this little SI, it can be a little bit weird. And so you've got this little SI with the aesthetics, with the ideas and the novelty of looking different. Think of Colin Baker's Sixth Doctor and what he looked like with his multicolored suit, if you can call it that. So this break function, this then goes into them seeing various viewpoints and having values that are very flexible, very situation, not really having a moral core. Their sort of ethics will be determined by wanting to have good relations with people. So saying things in order to fit in, because that gives them the happy atmosphere. Then they get the excitement. Then they can have the intellectual conversations. They don't really, because they don't have that strong ethical core. It has to be more come from the outside, externally, with manners and things like that. So a society where there's sort of a moral system, a system of manners, that could do well going to a finishing school. It's sort of better for them. If you think of Seinfeld, a continual theme of the Seinfeld sitcom is them discussing what was the socially accepted thing to do. Like, when should they break up with someone? How many dates should they have? And all of these kind of social conventions. There wasn't that natural, and I think Jerry Seinfeld in real life probably resembles ENTP, and the same with Larry David, where there isn't that internal moral compass. They're going by external standards of what is approved of socially. Then we get to FI. The definition of FI can be rather simplistic in JBTI as values. But it's not just values, because values are, according to NLP, are built around beliefs, and beliefs are generalizations. Now that was from Grinder, ISTP, DISX. So if you think about how the person, and this is why ENTPs can have a problem with knowing what is appropriate in a conversation, is because they don't have that feeling of interpersonal distance. But the interpersonal distance is not really a thing that is out there and read. It's a subjective thing. It is the ability to judge how much of a connection you have with somebody through a shared interest. But if you have very malleable ethics, it's very hard to connect with somebody. Whereas with EII, ethical intuitive introvert, with INFP, FINX, they know what they want, they know how they feel about things. So they will connect with somebody on a level of values. But again, it's subjective. If you had that INFP resembler meet a celebrity that they had a strong connection with, they would feel that bond, even though it's not actually there, because it's what they are actually confusing, how they feel about the person with the interpersonal distance. So you can get that with celebrities who meet their fans, and the fans think they're closest to them, they think they know the person. So if you think about how ethics of relations work, which is Socionics FI, it works on rapport, and rapport can be based around values, which is more of a thing with INFP resemblance, or it can just be based around a shared interest, a connection. This is one of the things that Robert McKee goes on about a lot, the audience bond, connecting with a character. And he said that even in the instance of Macbeth, the audience connected to Macbeth's guilt. So they had that shared thing, the audience bond, the empathy, and even Aristotle wrote this in, well, the Poetics are sort of like lecture notes, because what people said about him at the time was that his writing style was river of gold. Well, the lecture notes in the Poetics are not exactly a river of gold. It's best to read Robert McKee's story first, because that's the Chicago school of neo-Aristotelianism that have been Konstantin Alexiev added, aka stage name of Stanislavski, so it fleshed out a bit more. So it's that perception of similarity, and that is how you have the connection. But again, with ENTP, their core being so malleable and flexible, they're not really connecting with people on that level. They connect with people on the level of ideas. But even then, it's not really a connection, it's an intellectual conversation. They can connect with people based on the positive emotions around them that hits the FE that they're suggesting, especially if they're present, they're going to be absorbed into those emotions in a jolly atmosphere. And also what they're going to get from the SFJs is this sort of caretaking. What's he called? The logistical safe keys is the caretaking. If you think of how they are with SEI, with ISFJ, they're going to be they're going to get that. They're going to get the attention, the positive emotions, and being taken care of a bit, especially amongst male ENTP resemblers. So that's FI. That's why it's the break function in them. Pretty similar to, and so they're not very good at judging interpersonal distance. Plus, when they're doing the devil's advocate thing, that can ruin trying to get connection. Also, it's going to be harder for them to get connection because they're so abstract and most people aren't. Inflation avoidance block. Now, NI control. Loads of information for this, but not the energy. And I can prove this. They can see the trends, they can see how things are going. But if they did the NI thing, if they followed the trends and saw how to, and followed the path, but that's like seeing a single path. With the NE, they see multiple paths. So which one to take? And if they take one, and again with the EP flexible active mindset rather, then they start taking a path, they get bored with it, and they want to take another path. So it gets ignored, the NI. Whereas with the NI DOMs, it's the other way around. They see all of the possibilities, but they ignore them, put them to one side, and follow a path. Where this function, again like this one particularly is all talk and no walk, where it can give the path and tell other people the path, and they can follow it, but they don't want to follow it themselves because it contradicts the NE. So that, and I will place a link below to NeTx, and so you can see the hangout with Joe. And that, folks, is it. And again, you will be going through a LS profile. I think that is about it. And the next one I should do should be SeTx, ESTP promoter. The sort of like the expediter promoter. That's their role variant. Keirsey would say that the type pattern is tactical initiator. This would be strategic, the long-term thinking-ish, beyond the present moment. Again, it's going to go beyond the mindset of EP when they're developed. This is strategic collaborator. So that is the end.